Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. If you missed our last episode a couple weeks ago, we had one of our frequent flyer guests come back. We had Lisa Schaefer. She came back and she talked on a little bit more detail on what embodied therapy is and what that looks like, some examples of embodied therapy. She's been with us and did our chakra healing series. And then now we're talking about the holistic benefits of embodied therapy and the different types. So if you missed that, go back and check it out. This week, we welcome a fellow podcaster, and she hosted me on her podcast. And Marissa, I will let you do your plug at the end, but it's the Sun Happens podcast. I asked her to come and join us, and she's going to speak on the topic of creating sunshine even when there seems to be none. So this is Marissa Baker. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me.
Marissa, thank you so much for being here. And just to all of our audience, it's June, so happy Pride Month. And we celebrate you and all of the pride out there in June and all year long. And all the sunshine that comes along with Pride. Marissa, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad to meet you. I know Kelsi knows you, but if you can just give a little bit of a background about who you are, what you do, and why the topic today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kelsi and I met on TikTok, and so there I am known as, hi, I'm Marissa Baker, and I've been married and divorced twice before 30. But what I like to tell people is that is just my story, and my 2 divorces before 30 is the symptom, not the root. So my bigger passion is teaching people how to go through hard things, acknowledge those hard things, feel those hard things, and then by doing the inner work to heal, that's how we create our own sunshine. So my whole brand is like, hi, I'm a happy-go-lucky ray of freaking sunshine, and I'm going to teach you how to create your own sunshine, and not necessarily through toxic positivity or pretending everything is okay when it's not, but through truly doing the work to heal. So that's in short, Marissa, and what I am doing in the world.
Marissa, I wanted to ask you, I think I've seen you talking about it on TikTok. I would assume that's where I saw it, but you recently started, was it life coaching or something like for yourself? So like, again, at the end, we ask everybody, if there's any places they can find them. So we'll get to that at the end, but is that a piece of something you're doing now with clients?
Yes. So my whole brand is called the Sun Happens brand. So obviously we know the podcast is Sun Happens podcast, and that's just now Sun Happens is the bigger umbrella. So life coaching is going to fall under that brand. That's going to be one of the tools I use of how to show people how to create their own sunshine, by learning to just take an inventory of their thoughts, like bringing awareness around the thoughts that they're having, how that triggers feelings, how those feelings create actions, and how those actions create the result in your life. So yes, I'm absolutely doing life coaching now. I just got certified like a month ago, and I'm hyped all the way up. Thank you for asking.
I want to say congratulations, because I seen that video and I was like, oh, that's exciting. I get so excited for people. So
thank you.
All right, so let's roll right into it, Marissa. What does it mean to own your, quote unquote, own your story? I did air quotes, but we like to, again, that's another tip for our guests is if you're going to do anything visually. We had someone on here doing tapping once, and we were like, wait a minute, hold on, your audio listeners don't know where you're tapping or what's happening. So
yeah,
no, we try to describe. Yeah.
So I can't pinpoint exactly where this started with me, but I read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko. And it really is just all about taking full ownership in your life, no matter what. So one thing I learned in life coaching school is that we all have things that happen to us, right? We all have these circumstances and situations that occur in life that we cannot control. However, we have thoughts, and we create meaning around the things that happen to us. And those thoughts trigger feelings, which trigger actions. I know I said this already, but which trigger the results in your life. So all of the results that we have in our life can be can come back to the thoughts that we're having. And so extreme ownership for me comes back to taking the inventory of the thoughts that you're having and how they're creating the results in your life, and kind of just saying, hi, this all comes back to Marissa. And if I can take a look at my thoughts and figure out what thoughts are serving me and what thoughts are not serving me, then I can learn to create the results I want in this life and stop pointing the finger and blaming everybody and everything else.
I was gonna say, like I feel like when we start a healing journey, and everybody's healing journey is different, but when you start to become an active participant in that process, like that feeling of somebody looking at you, like whether it's your own therapist, your own life coach, just a friend, and somebody saying like, yeah, you're kind of a part of the problem, these problems that you're having. Like, do you see that? And then we can get very defensive. And I think that's a normal phase of it. But I love how you word that. Like, these things were these patterns, these beliefs, and all the thoughts, the things we're taking inventory of, the things that I emphasize to my clients in my practice is those didn't form for like no reason. Those formed at some point in time and they served a purpose.
That's
But
good.
at some point there in that process, we have to step back and be like, that's no longer.
And yeah, I love that, right? Because when you, like you said, when you can own that you're part of the problem, then you also are empowered to be like, I can also be part of the solution. And that's the part for me that like really like, if I could just put my pride aside and be like, okay, I get it. I don't want to be wrong. And I don't want to be, the person who contributed to these things in my life. But if I just set all of that aside and just say, okay, maybe I did a little, then I feel so empowered to just be like, I can move forward now. I can move forward and create what I want in this life. I no longer have to be bound to the past.
And so I think that moves us really good into our second piece here, and taking inventory of our negative beliefs and replacing them with old tired beliefs. Can you speak on that process, whether that is like what you're comfortable sharing, about what that looked like for you, or maybe some tips on how to help others do that for themselves, taking the inventory?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I always start with, we talked about the extreme ownership already. That's like one of the anchors of doing this work. The other anchor is either grace or compassionate curiosity. It's all the same to me. And so before taking an inventory of any thoughts that you have, I just want to remind people that it's okay to be kind to yourself. And it's okay to just be like, just kind of be curious, right? Like every time you do something, it is triggered ultimately by a thought. So every time I do something that is maybe out of character or that maybe I'm quote unquote judging myself for, I like to take a moment and just go, okay, what did you tell me when you came on my podcast? All behavior makes sense in context. So knowing that information, I can kind of just maybe be inquisitive, like, hey, Marissa, like you did this thing. You're not super proud of the thing, but you're human. It's okay. Why do you think that you did that? Right. And so for me, that is just such a big piece of, if I'm going to take an inventory of and take ownership, I have to have that grace and that compassion and that kindness toward myself. Or I'll just continue to stay in the shame cycle, which I talk about all the time, right? Is shame begets shame begets shame. And the more that I judge myself and I'm mean to myself, then I can't go deeper. I can't go where I need to go to take an inventory of those thoughts. And it's hard to give an example of when I was like in a bad mindset, because I'm in such a different mindset now. But it's such a non-linear process, right? It's like sometimes you won't have an awareness around your thoughts good, bad, or ugly until after the fact, right? When you can sit down, you're like, okay, why did I do that? And then it's like, I get it because, I yelled at my husband because I was scared that he didn't love me, right? Like whatever thought that it is. And then sometimes you have the awareness in the moment while you're doing something. So maybe I'm just going to stick with that same example. You're in a relationship, you start yelling at your partner, and while you're yelling, you're like, oh my God, I'm doing that thing again. And I know what thought this is stemming from. And then ultimately the level of awareness that we strive to be at is when we can kind of call out that thought as it arrives and allow the thought to be there without acting on it, and just being like, oh, I see you negative thought, and I see how I could react from this, but you know what? I'm just going to let you exist there, and I'm going to keep moving forward. So I think, just taking an inventory of your thoughts is really just kind of allowing that non-linear awareness, being inquisitive with yourself. And it takes time because there's no way to become aware of those things until you do them. And then you're like, oh, that might be a trigger or something I need to explore. So I think that answers your question. I think it answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And that process can be so frustrating. Like I tell my clients, like when you start to get frustrated with yourself, like that it's kind of a joke, but like, in mental health, we have like lighthearted jokes for heavy things. So we
Dark
always
humor is what I call it.
I'm like, well, and it's like, if you're getting frustrated, you're doing something right. And self-awareness, like when you start to get it, I always say it feels like a blessing and a curse, because it's like, there it is again. Like, and I think you can go two paths with it, and you touched on those. I think you can go on a path of like self-hate or shaming or all of that with it, or you can say like, okay, that means that I'm getting a little bit better at this. Like, it's still frustrating, but I'm seeing it now, and I have the information that I need to respond differently to others and myself.
Right. And I think one thing going to the point of replacing those thoughts that you have, that I didn't touch on yet, is I don't believe that you can replace the negative thoughts in your mind until you're aware of them. So there really is, it's not linear, but there really is like a flow to this. And it's like, okay, once I become aware of a thought, I have the inventory of that thought, then I get to look at my what I'll call the models. What I learned in coaching school is, okay, here's the thought that I had, here's the feeling that it created, and here's the overall result that it created. Is this thought serving me? And I get to decide that. And if I look at the results of that thought and it ends up in me doing something that I don't want to be doing, then to me, the result or the thought is not serving me. So if I choose that thought's not serving me, then I can also choose to have a different thought. And I'm not saying that happens right away or that it's immediate, but I can actively choose that is not a thought that I want to have, and then start working on replacing that thought with something that does serve me and gives me the result that I want in this life.
It's such a, it's like so relative to mindfulness too, I think, which I teach my clients often, right? Like just being in the moment to even recognize what's going on. Like our brains are computers. They're trying to make the fastest connections possible to make our lives easier. And so sometimes we don't have that awareness in the moment, right? And I think it sounds like what you learned in your coaching program is basic CBT, like situation, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and then actions and consequences, right? And yeah, absolutely. Like once you have a thought, your brain is going to be biased and search for information, right? It's going to be like a magnet that aligns with that theory you've created. I just think we would be remiss, being who we are and being trauma informed, to not forget that oftentimes, like you said, like we don't have the awareness, but we also don't even have the awareness that there is a thought. Like even personally in my own therapy, there's times where my therapist would be like, and what do you think about that? Or what does that make you like? what thoughts come along with that. And I'm like, I don't really know. It's just a feeling at this point. Like your body is viscerally protecting you, whether it's an attachment wound, a situational trauma, developmental trauma, whatever that is, like your body has learned. And then the word vomit or the action or the behavior comes out and you don't even have the pause to think about it. It becomes so reactive and impulsive.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I am certainly not trauma informed, but I love the emphasis on the feeling and not necessarily being aware of the thought or sometimes it's buried really deep, and that's okay. One of the things I learned, and I love that you said that, is, can we choose our thoughts? Absolutely, yes, we can. It takes a lot of work. However, there are some thoughts that create such a powerful feeling within us that you have to feel it, right? So I want people, as they're listening, to understand very clearly, like, this is not about, oh my gosh, well, if I get to choose my thoughts, then I get to create the happiest life ever and I'll just be happy all the time. That is not it, right? Like, you still have to feel your feelings. You have to process that feeling sometimes in order to just get an awareness around that thought. And it also, I just want to note this, the goal is not to never feel negative feelings. Life is always going to be 50-50. And sometimes we choose to feel sad because we can, right? And so I just kind of want to mention that this is not about, when I say creating sunshine, it's not just creating sunshine to be happy all the time. It's more or less learning that I can support myself no matter what feelings I have. And if the worst thing that can happen to me in this life is a feeling, then I have everything I need to support myself in that.
Yeah. And I think that it's part of the process. Like, I try to tell my clients, it's like nipping it in the bud, right? Like, once you can identify the feelings in your body and where they are and what might be happening, then you can develop safety in your body and regulate yourself. And once you can do that consistently enough, you might start to be able to identify some thoughts. And then once you do that enough, then you can, like, identify them readily. And then once you can identify them readily, now you can intervene, right? Like, it just becomes, like you said, this linear but not linear, because there's going to be ups and downs and new activators and all sorts of things.
Right.
Yeah. So tell us how you use this process. Like, I think you shared, like, through the lens of your own story, and you kind of mentioned, like, divorce before 30 and your childhood trauma and toxic positivity. How does this all play out with, using your thoughts to kind of change your life or create the life you want?
Well, for starters, I would say to you guys that all of these things were absolutely buried very, 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 very deep in my mind. I had no idea that all of these things that had happened to me, my thoughts about them, my beliefs, were creating this life for myself. But the result that I had in my life was that I ended up married and divorced twice before 30. And so then I thought, okay, well, I can no longer blame the other person because I'm the common denominator here. This is a pattern that I've now seen in my life twice, all within a decade. Like, that's wild. So my situation kind of forced me to take ownership and say, okay, maybe it's not the other person. Where does Marissa need to grow? What does she need to acknowledge? All of the things. So I started going to therapy before my second divorce. And I vividly remember my therapist being like, you have trauma. And I was like, excuse me? No, sir. I am a happy-go-lucky ray of sunshine and I'm fine. And he's like, no, but what's under all of that joy? And I was like, what are you talking? He's like, and if you say more joy, I was like, it's joy. That's all I have. It's the only emotion that I know. And so he was like, immediately we switched our program to a trauma. I mean, I don't know really how to describe it, but he's trauma certified as well. And I just started learning more and more about what was underneath my fake joy. And that's why I talk so much about the sunshine and creating your sunshine and that toxic positivity, because Marissa 2 years ago absolutely was like, nope, I'm fine. I'm great. All I feel is joy. Everyone else get on the joy train. And if you're not on the joy train, something must be wrong with you. And then I realized underneath all of that, I had a lot of things that I had just resisted and probably repressed for many, many years, um, family dynamics. There's a lot of people in my family that abused drugs, and chaos was very normal for me. I was molested as a young kid, and I didn't realize how that had affected the way that I think about life, not even just, within relationship, but as a whole. And then, I entered into these relationships with men who were not bad men by any means. And I really kind of feel bad because I feel like I hurt them. Well, I did hurt them, and hurt people. So I guess I've forgiven myself for that. But I just, I chose certain people in my life because of the way that I was thinking about myself. So to me, like, chaos was normal. Men who were emotionally unavailable were normal. And at the core of all of it, Marissa didn't feel like she was worthy or valuable enough for more. And I didn't know how to value myself or love myself, or anything like that. So when I got out of my second marriage, I really I did the whole thing where I point the finger back at myself, and I just said, I love you. Let's figure out how to love you more. And the person that you've been resisting for many years, she still exists in there. She needs you. And why don't you just spend a year or whatever getting to know yourself so that you're no longer controlled by these things that you continue to push and shove down. Yeah.
That, Marissa, is a regularly recommended regular recommendation, I guess is the word, in the like specifically AA, but like a lot of self-help meetings is like, don't date anyone for a year while you heal and work on your own stuff, and don't use drugs, because people are oftentimes used as, outlets like drugs. And when we're so roped up in those relationships, it's very hard to focus on ourselves and do that healing. And yet, doing that healing, seemingly alone, right? Where our brain goes, is like, oh my gosh, I have to be alone. I don't have anyone to, but like, there's supports that you need in your life through that process, absolutely. But that can be terrifying, especially with someone that might have, issues with attachment trauma from family caregivers or things like that, right? Like, all is trying to find safety in another person. So to say, no, you can't have that right now while you heal yourself might sound
terrifying.
Shocking. Yeah, terrifying. Yeah. Overwhelming. Yeah. So how, I guess, I'm just intrigued, like, did you have that experience, and how did you work through that fear? Like, were you a person where you felt like, and you, like, that might be challenging for me to not have a relationship?
Yeah. I did not ever say to myself that I'm not going to date. But what I did say to myself was that I was going to focus on Marissa. And so it never really felt like that for me, because I never took dating off the table. I just put me on the table, and I just took up a lot of room on the table. And so that, I guess, no one else really fit there. And so for me, it was more like, babe, who are you? Like, do you like honey lavender tea at 9 p.m.? Yes. Do you want to wear matching jammies? Also, yes. And a lot of the things that I've learned, it makes me so happy, is a lot of the things I thought that I liked, air quotes, were just the things that I were using as a distraction. I'm like, oh, I love Netflix. I watched 5 seasons of Grey's Anatomy in a week. And really, it's like I didn't actually like it. I was just trying not to feel. And but same thing, it's like I was going out all the time. I was probably like 20 pounds heavier, because I was drinking heavily, like 3 times a week at least, and I was eating my feelings. And so I'm like, I'm like, these 3 things that I thought that I loved, binging Netflix, drinking alcohol, and binging on food, are 3 things that are no longer have as big of a role in my life. And so it's been very eye-opening. I'm like, oh, I don't actually love food that much. I loved the dopamine hit that it gave me to help me forget that I was sad inside. And so yeah, it's just been such a wonderful journey. And I just know I never, it was hearing you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is terrifying, but I never really felt alone or scared because I just didn't think about it. I was like, I gotta help myself.
Did you find yourself, so I have multiple thoughts and I'm trying to organize them. For one, that when you were talking about like what things do I genuinely like?
Yeah.
So often I feel like we try to logic our way through it too. Like if I can make things make sense, or if I can, just say this is something that I like, then it's like I can say so detached. And when you started talking about the things that felt genuine to you, I almost got like an inner child type feeling. And I tell my clients, I said, we can't celebrate in the same way that we cope is our saying in our field. So if you look at those things that you're engaging in your life, the Netflix, or those are just examples, but am I going to those things to when I feel good and I want to celebrate things and I, feel joy and all of that? And am I also going to those things if I'm feeling down, or if I'm feeling angry, or if I'm feeling sad? Because then I'm turning to, it all starts to serve one purpose. And usually that's just to help me not feel, and then it becomes very familiar. My brain starts to associate, it makes associations with those things. And I always say, when we start to take inventory of those things, finding things that bring out that inner child, like, and I just like the warmth and the like, oh my gosh, this makes me feel, light and connected. And I don't know how else. Amanda, help me.
No, when you were talking about your jammies, I was like, her inner child, she's honoring her. But I didn't say it out loud because I do. Me and Kelsi, I'm like, oh, does she know about Marissa? Do you know about this book? It's my favorite book. This lady, honestly, I should have a sponsorship by her. I think The Recovery of Your Inner Child. It's probably blurred by you, but this book is amazing. It's amazing.
It's very good.
And that's what I was thinking of, like, you're like, I've got my nice warm tea and I got my jammies that match. And I was like, oh, you're like fostering your inner child. And that's exactly what needs to happen for healing. I always say, like, so many people want to come to therapy and be like, yeah, so like my job's stressful, or like my parents, like, I don't know, we don't have a good relationship, or like I can't have communication issues with my partner. I'm like, uh-huh. And then like, like 5-10 more sessions, they're like, hey, that trauma that you said you didn't have, like you, right? Like, I'm like, hey, any trauma in the assessment, right? And I give examples. They're like, no. Because most people go to like war veterans or like, something huge that they compare isn't, right? And so then you get into therapy and you start uncovering the layers and you're like, maybe you're right. Maybe it all does go back to childhood, but like accepting that and thinking, oh my gosh, all the stuff has been that deep rooted. Like, that's, holy crap, that in itself is overwhelming. So the fact that you were able to like honor your inner child in this loving yourself process was probably so healing for you, I can guess.
Oh my God, it's been amazing. Actually, like you saying that, it triggered a memory. Like I remember talking to my therapist and he said to me that I had the trauma that day, and I'm like, what? And he's telling me, probably all reverts back to your earliest trauma and development. And so I'm like, okay, I got molested in 3rd grade. So and what he told me, which was so eye-opening for me, was that all trauma is connected. So when you get triggered as an adult, you usually respond to it in the same way that you were triggered as a child. And I'm like, no way. So I went home that day and I did something that absolutely triggered me. Have you guys seen the Netflix show Athlete A? It's about the Olympics, the USA gymnastics doctor, and he was like sexually abusing the gymnasts. So of course I went home and I put that show on. And then I thought, okay, well, let me Google symptoms of a child who's been molested at this age. I think I was like 7. So I Googled all the symptoms, and I, for the first time in my life, read all of them, and it was like, this is probably way TMI, but like has nightmares, chronic, like pleasuring yourself, like all this other stuff. I had all of these things, and I just bawled my eyes out. Like I literally just started crying, and I'm like, this inner child inside of me has been begging for me to see her for 29 years. And it's not until this moment right here that I'm like, oh my God, the nightmares were trying to tell me, the behaviors were trying to tell me, and I never understood it. But I want to say that was probably the first moment of realizing that. And so from there, then I was like, okay, so now I get that it's all connected. And so let me go back to times where I was triggered. How did I respond? And I really did respond in the same way. So this was like all over the course of one weekend. And I came back and my therapist was like, you just did like months worth of work in a weekend. And I was like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, I can't.
I always describe it as like, and now that I have a child of my own, it's even more visceral for me, but I'm like, do you have a child, or do you have a child in your life, like someone that's smaller that you can imagine, even if they're older now, can you imagine them as a toddler? And, you know, they're 1 year old, tugging at your leg, crying, bawling their eyes out, screaming, crying, tugging at your leg. Please pick me up, please, right? And you're just like, I don't have time for you. Go away. You're annoying. I don't want to deal with you, right? Over and over and over again. That's what's happening. And our body, like you said, our body will find ways to tell us, right? And I describe it as like an escalation process, and that's what happens in our stress response and the stress disease connection. I can go off on my tangents, but like our body, well, it'll start with things like thoughts, things like anxiety, things like panic attacks, things like insomnia and sleep issues. And then it gets to chronic pain and chronic health conditions, right? Cancer, it's the biggest, right? Because our body's like, dude, please sit down and listen to me.
Yeah.
Please, I'm trying to tell you something and you won't listen. So I'm going to make you sit down, because otherwise we're not going to make it much longer.
Yeah. It's good.
Marissa, I wanted to ask you, and this isn't like identities of your support system, but whenever you were like, holy cow, and I loved that saying, how I'm not going to word it the same way you did, but I never took dating off the table, but I put me on the table. And then if somebody came along and they fit on what's left of the table, then like, okay, we'll see how this goes. But you never left that table. And I say all of that to ask you, like, what did you have to make changes in your support network or the people in your life, or did that strengthen for you?
Boundaries.
Like, yeah, but did you have to set up for a lot of new boundaries? Like, what did the support area of your life look like when you took that time?
Yeah, actually, my circle got a lot smaller. And I say that because the Marissa who was avoiding her feelings had thousands of acquaintances. I'm like, I'll hang out with you tomorrow and you Friday and you next week, and anything not to feel. I feels kind of mean saying that, but very true. And so I had a number of relationships that were all just surface level. And they made me feel good in the moment because the person was hyping me up, and we'd hang out one time and then never hang out again. But I found myself not really having any deeper relationships. And my ex-husband actually said that to me once, and I was so offended. And now that I think about it, now I do have a few core friends and they're still in the picture, and I've always had them. But my focus has really narrowed down. I don't have, if it's not a hell yes, it is a hell no. Okay. That's with people, that's with things, that's with, if I get that visceral intelligence in my body where I start to tense up, I'm like, that's a no for me, dog. And like, yeah, it's changed so much. Like, I feel like a different person. Actually, there's a line in a Taylor Swift song, and I can't remember what it is, but it's kind of along the lines of, if you're friends with everyone, you're friends with no one. And I was like, whoa. So yeah, a lot more boundaries, a lot more saying no to myself, because I was the one putting all this on myself. And yeah, I have my like 3 or 4 key people, and those are the people that I talk to, hang out with, my thing with. And I don't have this constant urge or desire to bring in more surface level. Like I'm good and I'm satisfied where I am at.
I think those relationships, like if it makes us, prior to healing and doing this work and things like been starting that journey, I think having all of the superficial, that also is keeping me from feeling, because I'm not letting people in any closer than like way out there. So they don't know me. I don't know me. They don't know me. And that we're just gonna stay there. We're just gonna like that. That feels safe right now because
Same with my
it's
marriages.
so uncomfortable and so unsafe to to go way deeper within ourselves and with other people. So like it makes total sense. So I don't know. Something told me to ask that. I know that wasn't part of our talking point, so I didn't want to make you feel on the spot. But I see that it's a trickle down effect whenever we start, looking at ourselves hardcore. It's like then we look outside of ourselves and it's like, woo.
Yeah. Whoops.
It doesn't have to be bad. There's nothing, we're not personalizing it to those people, or, that's where we're not pointing fingers at anybody. It's just like, oh, that's not only are thoughts and emotions and things not serving me, but the behaviors we talked about aren't serving me. And there can be relationships with people that just aren't serving me either.
Yeah, I love that.
You're not alone in that. If you start to feel like, holy cow, my garden of supports and things that it starts to naturally look very different.
Yeah.
I also just want to say thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your story, Marissa, because the more that we do that, the more normalized it becomes. And the more in touch with our feelings, our emotions, and each other we become. And it also like hypes up therapy even more, right? Like those things that were in you, it didn't take much. It just took a mirror, like almost a helpful mirror pointing a few things out, blemishes that you hadn't noticed, right? You'd been doing so well at covering them up that someone else was just like, hey, did you notice this? And you're like, oh my gosh, right? And then you could go do the self-explorative work, right? Because you were ready for it, and then have that team member to guide you and support you through it. So I just had to say thank you, and thank you for hyping up therapy because we need more of that.
Oh my God. I am all about it, my girls. And the one thing I live by is because I spent so many years without true authenticity, right? That toxic positivity. I have now realized that when you are fully authentic, and that includes the vulnerability, yourself, you give other people permission to be fully authentic and fully themselves. And so I love that you said that, because that's one of my core principles is I don't want to shy away from conversations, and I don't want to leave anything off the table, because I want people to know that, look at me, I'm 1000% myself. I'm sharing everything, and you can too, and it's okay.
I do think it helps break through that the shame, that barrier, that wall of shame. Like it can take you a minute to get there, to share your story and to connect with others on it. But I think we always say silence breeds shame. So thank you so much for your time, for being here. And just your platform and what you're doing. Thank you so much. And we ask everybody if there is any like last wrapping up thoughts, or like any mantra maybe that you have, or like a little tidbit to leave our listeners with before we start to wrap up and do our outro stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think my mantra really just has to be what my whole life is, right? And that's sun happens. It's a play on shit happens, but reminding people that good things happen too, and that you can create your own sunshine if you're willing to do the work. And it's not easy. It's uncomfortable, but it is so worth it. And I just want to give people hope too. That's such a big part of my message is I know you, I've been you, I see you, and I know that shit gets really tough sometimes, but there is sunshine on the other side, and it's within your control to get there. So yeah, I think I would just wrap up with that statement of like, sun happens, and when you can't find it, create it, you know?
Thank you so much, Marissa. Where can it's the Sun Happens podcast. I'm sure it's available on most podcast platforms. And then is there anywhere else our audience can find you?
Yeah, so I am on Spotify and iTunes. And then I actually have a website, so sunhappens.net, and there's a podcast tab. So all of my podcast episodes will actually upload to my website. It's probably the easiest way to do it. And then I have 3 main social medias, Instagram and TikTok. My personal pages are the Marissa Baker. And that's kind of where I just talk about my personal journey, where I'm at, all of the things. And then I have Sun Happens Official on Instagram. And yeah, that's where you ladies and any of your listeners can find me.
I love this. Thank you so much. It was so great to meet you. Again, I appreciate you sharing your story.
Wow.
And for everyone listening, make sure you check out, we'll put that in the show notes. We'll put your podcast and your website and all those lovely things so people can find you and learn more. Next week, we have another returning guest that we're so thankful to have come back, a good friend, Morgan Bennett. She was back here in May, being vulnerable, talking about her TBI, trauma, and anxiety. She's actually coming back to talk about, I'm having a brain fart now.
Preventing
Oh yes, thank you. Preventing burnout in the workplace. Thank you. Words were getting hard. I knew it was something about the workplace, but preventing burnout in the workplace, which, like, hello, even before the pandemic, let alone the last 3 years, super important topic. So I'm very thankful to have her coming back. If you haven't already, make sure you turn on notifications or subscribe so that you don't miss out on the latest episode. And we will see you all in 2 weeks. We're 2 weeks now.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.